Welcome to the Biotech Startups podcast by Excedr. Join us as we speak with first-time founders, serial entrepreneurs, and experienced investors about the challenges and triumphs of running a biotech startup, from pre-seed to IPO, with your host, Jon Chee.
My guest today is Michael Chen, Chief Executive Officer and Co-Founder of Nuclera. In 2013, while working on his Ph.D. at the University of Cambridge, Michael and his co-founders became frustrated by the inaccessibility of proteins to support everything from basic research to drug discovery. This prompted them to found Nuclera with a clear mission in mind: make proteins more accessible to everyone by providing rapid access to high-quality, soluble active proteins at the benchtop. For the past 10 years, Michael has led the company in raising multiple funding rounds totaling $146 million. He's built a team of over 100 people strong over 2 continents and leads the commercial strategy behind bringing their innovative rapid protein prototyping technology to market. Michael's decade of experience running and growing a biotech startup offers insights founders don't want to miss. Over the next 2 episodes, we dive into Michael's Taiwanese-American immigrant upbringing to becoming a biotech entrepreneur. We hear about his early lab experiences at Emory and Georgia Tech, as well as his move to the UK for his PhD at Cambridge, where he eventually met his future co-founders. We also delve into his transition from academia to co-founding Nuclera, navigating the unique challenges of the startup world, and developing breakthrough technologies in protein production. Finally, Michael shares insights on building partnerships with Big Pharma, tackling lengthy sales cycles, and the importance of delivering lasting value to customers. Today, we talk with Michael about growing up in a data-driven household and how it fueled his journey into scientific research and entrepreneurship. We'll also talk about his undergraduate lab experiences and the challenges and discoveries that came from moving to the UK for his graduate studies at the University of Cambridge. Without further ado, let's dive into this episode of the Biotech Startups podcast.
Michael, thanks for coming on the podcast. And as we were thinking about where to start this conversation, we always like to start it off with the kind of traditional opener of trying to really figure out what influenced your leadership style and business philosophy. And so we wanted to turn the hands back to your earliest days. So can you tell us a little bit about your upbringing and how did you eventually get into science and business?
My upbringing. So my parents are Taiwanese, right? They came in the late 80s, early 90s over to the States. My dad was studying a PhD in chemical engineering. And I always sort of grew up, and my mom was an accountant. So I always grew up in a very highly technical, data-driven family. And like any good, American-born Chinese first-generation person, they wanted me to be a medical doctor. And they said, definitely don't go do a PhD because that's the path to poverty. I think the one thing I'm really grateful to my parents and the upbringing I had was self-reliance, right? I had a lot of, support from my parents. They were, very strict in their upbringing early on. I still, my earliest memories of my parents teaching me stuff is I was sat in front of one of those ABC blocks that you flip around, right? And so you can flip them around to reveal the letter of the alphabet. And I would go A, B, F. And my parents would just whack me with a chopstick, right? And
they're oh no,
I was flying in front of D, don't, right? That type of thing. And so from them reinforcing that throughout my childhood, I sort of self-reinforced through high school, so that they really didn't need to force me to study or do anything like that. Even throughout college, right? Always just remember that whack with a chopstick, right? I don't want to get hit by a chopstick on my hand, so you better study your ass off, right? And so, I naturally gravitated towards sciences, chemistry, biology in high school. Moved around with my parents, so brought up in California, actually born in Santa Barbara. Moved with my dad, who was doing school, then jobs, to New Jersey, to San Diego, to Florida, to Atlanta, a couple of other places. And all throughout that was just a constant, love of sciences, et cetera. It's your friend groups change, et cetera, but your study habits, et cetera. That was formed from what my parents did as an occupation, and really, really luckily, my mom. She took time off from her career in accounting and finance to raise my sister and I, my younger sister and I, and really, really grateful to that.
I'm curious, when you were moving around and from state to state and ended up settling in Georgia, can you talk a little bit about like what were some of the probably maybe painful, but kind of what were the lessons and kind of like challenges and triumphs of having to go through that experience of relocating schools, making new friends? I'm going to imagine there was an aspect you had to be learn resilience really, really early on.
A memory that sticks in my head forever is I remembered my elementary school in California. But I was in San Diego at that time. We had by something like fourth or fifth grade, just a ton of textbooks. I don't know why we had so many textbooks. It's like 8 or 9 or 10 textbooks or something like that. It was really heavy. I don't know if the students still do this or if it's all digitized nowadays. But I didn't want to carry all that crap on my back, so I had a roller backpack, right? And so I was walking around elementary school into sixth grade with a roller backpack, and no one told me this. Apparently that's not cool to have a roller backpack.
Hey, kids can be cruel. Kids can be cruel as well.
Yeah, I remember just walking around, getting my roller backpack kicked, and some Asian statements yelled at me, and I'm like, why? I'm like it, and then I remember elementary school, one of my teachers saying, what Michael is doing is smart, because you don't want to ruin your back at this early age, right? You want to do what Michael's doing with a roller backpack. And then after the third kick, I remember saying to my parents, "Yeah, I'm not doing this anymore. We're my back. We are
going to ruin my back. I'm going. Sacrifices have to be made, but
appearances over function."
Yeah,
and I feel like that's what defines literally everything, the entire fashion industry, et cetera. Appearances over function. And so, you go into my child and everything since, is that the Michael defining moment, the third kick to his roller backpack, and my drive for validation from everyone? No, I don't know. Let's not get into too much psychology here, but your question was what were the trials and tribulations and triumphs from that?
I'm going to imagine it's really, it's a lot growing up to be moving. It sounded like you moved around a lot of states, and you probably have to be adaptable on the fly. I'm going to imagine. For me, I've just been in the Bay Area my whole life, pretty much. Born in Berkeley, been in Berkeley since child through the university, and I moved to San Francisco. So what's your by the way, that's a huge move, Berkeley to San Francisco. I know. Yeah, exactly. So I had the opposite experience. So I'm always curious when someone who has lived a different experience, what that experience is like. For me, part of my identity is inextricably tied to Berkeley and kind of the unified school district and all those things. But I'm always curious because I think that experience that you've lived is certainly a different one than mine, and must have, I might be reading in the tea leaves, but it sounds like you have to be strong to move that, move around like that. But obviously and it sounded like you ended up settling in Georgia. So I was just more curious about that.
Yeah. What's your background, heritage?
Yeah. So my parents were the same. My parents were immigrants, came to ultimately settled in Berkeley for grad school. Structural engineer. Mom's also in finance. So very similar background. And so by virtue of that, I ended up being in Berkeley because my dad was completing grad school. And yeah, so very similar. I went into STEM just like you. But
does your mom also, when you were starting Excedr, right? Did she like say, I just don't understand how businesses are unprofitable? Start unprofitable. Like, when are you going to cash flow break even?
That's
like, what's going on here?
Yeah, in essence, my mom was also an accountant, so but it's, I think something that's interesting about that too, just being in the Bay Area, is there's styles of finance everywhere, and the Bay Area being kind of close in proximity to the Palo Alto, Silicon Valley, there's a different way of financing a company. So that style. We were, again, before we were hitting record, like if you go to New York, it's like, more traditional finance where it's all about, the venture capital kind of MO is not as deeply rooted. So but I think there was, my mom coming from a traditional finance background, definitely kind of, I heard it at home, definitely. And to the run up of Excedr for sure. Your undergraduate research, I know you did a stint at Emory, but you ended up, was that before Georgia Tech, or was that kind of at the same time?
I, at that point, wanted to, part of that MCAT, whatever thing. I, again, never took the GRE, went to grad school, but, right? Yeah.
Yeah. Shouts out. Yeah.
I said, I think, I want to spend my summers working in a laboratory, someone's, bagging groceries at the grocery store, or selling lemonade on the side of the street. People still do that, by the way, they sell lemonade on the side of the street. I want to, go work in a lab, and see what that looks like. And so, this, part of the, what I'm grateful to my parents for is the privilege of some of the connections that my dad had. And so he got me connected to this laboratory at Emory University, and Professor David Lynn's laboratory. He's the chair of the chemistry department at Emory at that time. And that guy had like research all over the place, right? He did work on, protein amyloidosis, which is the process of proteins aggregating, and potentially, that's important to, Alzheimer's progression and a lot of other biological processes. But, I was working on in his lab, crop science. Yeah. He did everything. And he also worked on origins of life research. That's how ultimately I got connected to at Georgia Tech to work on the chemical origins of life. But at Emory, I worked on crop science research, got paired up with this grad student. His name was Andrew Palmer. And we, were studying, I was amazed by this, a diversity of plants. Did you know that there are plants that will, this is like out of a science fiction horror movie, will grow into other plants and sort of suck all the nutrients away from those plants? These are called, obligate parasites, parasitic angiosperms that will literally, how roots grow through soil. These roots, when they germinate, will just penetrate right into another root system and will grow and then flower and then just stunt the growth of other plants. And so what ends up happening is there's this type of a parasitic plant called witchweed. that you would think, okay, why would anyone care about studying it? Well, it turns out that it grows into the roots of commercially important crops. Okay, like grasses like corn, maize, sorghum, millet, these types of things, and reduces crop yield significantly, like greater than 50, 60, 70%, really significant loss of crop productivity. And so what David Lin's lab was studying was, how does this plant and how did it evolve to know where to grow? It's not like his eyes, where to grow to be able to grow into a host plant. Is it random and it just uses chance to get there? Or is there some chemical sensing process? And it turns out there's a chemical sensing process. I don't know if you knew this.
No.
At the of every plant, what they do is they radiate hydrogen peroxide, okay? And they will oxidize, these chemicals from other plants and detect those chemicals, right? And these molecules either tell a plant to grow towards or grow away. Most plants want to grow away from other plant systems to optimize their growth, right? These parasites want to grow towards those roots. And did you know that there's a term for the soil environment? It's called the rhizosphere. So like the soil climate or the environment around within the soil, and especially around the roots, is the rhizosphere. So there's all sorts of sensing going on and life going on in the rhizosphere, and that was really, really fascinating. And I thought, that this is amazing. This is one of the things that hooked me on scientific research.
That's really rad, to be honest. I wish I had that that lab experience earlier, because I don't think I got it until like a couple years in. I kind of like stumbled into it because a friend was like, "Hey, come try it." And I was like, "Sure, why not?" And I think getting that, I love how that's like can be an early spark for you. And it sounds like from David Lin's lab, it kind of naturally evolved. Did it play into your decision into going to Georgia Tech?
Well, the cost certainly did. Like Emory,
yeah, absolutely. As it should.
And the secret that I probably wouldn't get banned from stepping foot on Georgia Tech, Emory's campus. The secret to that entire dynamic there is you go to Georgia Tech and you get access to a lot of Emory resources. So you go to the cheap route, which is through Georgia Tech, and then you can basically live on Emory campus if you want.
The secret's out. The secret's out. It's I feel like that's like similar to Berkeley too. Just like Berkeley, Berkeley kind of like obviously being a major part of the city itself, but like kind of neighboring campuses kind of like adjacent to it too. You kind of get to, it's very collaborative in Berkeley. So it's like, I can see it being a similar way. And when you got to Georgia Tech, so it sounded like at this point, you're like, okay, I've done this undergraduate research. You told your father, surprise, like I'm going to stay in the lab. And now you took your next role at Georgia Tech in the lab. Can you talk a little bit about the actual just like things that you were doing, things that you were learning, and like responsibilities that you were tasked with in the lab, and kind of what was the lab culture like? Because I know every lab is different. Some are well resourced, some are not. Some are just like kind of just like this kind of entropy, just like kind of this like organism that just like goes, and some are super regimented. What was it like for you at Georgia Tech?
In the lab specifically? Yeah. For me, I learned over there, I used to remember, everyone should do their own lab washing, right? So I didn't really want to do the lab washing. And I remember my professor came up to me and said, Michael, you are very fortunate, right? You got into this early, you got in through connections. Just do the damn dishes.
Yeah. Yeah. That's
right.
Yeah.
And then I was like, yeah, you know what? Maybe yeah, fine. Yeah, I'll do it. Now, there is no task that is too small in order to make a larger organization just tick and run, right? And I think that was really, really valuable for the startup experience, which is just basically you cannot be above replacing the toilet paper bathroom. You cannot be above, washing the dishes in the sink. No one in that startup is going to care about that startup more than you will, because, frankly, you got the equity. Your employees don't necessarily have the same amount of equity, or if they have the same amount of equity, well then, you just got to be willing to do everything, right? And so that's one thing that really stuck out to me. The second is, you need mentorship. You definitely need to make sure that you quickly pair up, buddy up, and have someone teach you and help you with things. But ultimately, it's the same thing. No one's going to care more about your success than yourself. So you really need to care about your own success. And so if you want to get things done, you need to be willing to unlock any amount of hours required to do it. Yes, there's a lot of luck involved, but the only way to get there, and hard work will get you there, but the only way to get there is just be willing to do the work and be willing to fail and be willing to try, because that's what I was doing in the lab, and just trying a bunch of stuff in a semi-structured way. And being smart about it, reading up, making sure you know what the community is doing, asking for advice, how to do things, how should you be thinking about things, asking for mentorship, but ultimately being willing to just spend any amount of hours required to get the task done, to get the job done. And that's really what entrepreneurship requires, any amount of hours required. You can't be precious about your hours. You need to just spend whatever time, scrounge around, ask people for help, rack up a lot of IOUs, that's the moral of the story there. That's
I had a similar experience, by the way. It was I was doing cell line maintenance and cell culture and making our own media, and I was doing the dishes. And it's kind of this thing where I think, at least for me, and just being a outside observer and just admiring what I think are admirable or formidable organizations, is that exactly what you said. No one's above this smallest stuff. Everyone wants to be a rock star, but no one wants to do the laundry. But it's doing the laundry and doing it well, everything you do and holding it to a high standard, I think, is how you create an admirable organization that tick and work well. I think where you start to get dysfunction is when you start, exactly what you said, thinking you're above it. And I'm not saying you should be making media forever, but understanding how media is made and living that experience is important. And eventually, in our lab, we got enough grant funding to be able to buy the media. So that was great. So I didn't have to do it anymore. And, there's other issues making media, higher risk of contamination and so on and so forth. But had a similar experience too, where I was you don't have you're just going to do the dishes. You're going to do the dishes. So I totally empathize with that. And as it sounded like your experience was fast paced, a lot of hard work at Georgia Tech, and you decided to go over to the UK. I guess first question, a more personal one. what was that personal experience moving from the US, specifically Georgia, to the UK? How was that for you?
It sucked. It really did. I really did not enjoy that first year, right? Like, so I was on this program called the NIH Oxford Cambridge Scholars program. So, yeah, it's really, I think, a really great program, right? So, it basically was a NIH financed PhD at either Oxford or Cambridge. Okay, and so you start the first couple of months at the National Institutes of Health in Bethesda, Maryland. You formulate your project, or at least this was the structure at the time I was doing the Oxygen program. It's gone through multiple iterations since then. And then they then, depending on how your project is organized, ping you over to your university, whichever university you were going to, department, et cetera. And I went to the University of Cambridge, went to this college system, et cetera, found that really charming. I guess my childhood sort of prepared me for just sort of uprooting really quickly, but you got to remember, I was always close to my parents, right?
Yep.
And so even though I went to Georgia Tech, they were only 45 minutes away. My dad at that time worked at Coca-Cola, so that was literally, I could see the building every single day.
Yeah.
So I suddenly was lost that anchor of having dinner with my parents every other week or something like that, and that was a little disorienting. First, the second is just rained all the freaking time. Landed in I remember in October, November of 2012, right? So that's dating me now. So October, November of 2012, that was the start of the semester. And that time of year in Cambridge, UK is miserable. It's just raining all the time. And I never gotten on a bus by myself in my life, so I was very fearful of buses. So I was just walking or cycling in the rain, entire time, going to what I thought in terms of project would take me six months initially to finish, ended up taking me 4 years. So it was not going well. And everyone spoke a weird form of English there. So, yeah, I didn't enjoy that. That was very, showing up wet all the time, starting my PhD for the
great way to start.
First time. And I remember going, saying, okay, enough is enough. I'm going to try this bus system out so I don't get so I go there and, I get on a bus because there's a thing called the Uni 4 bus that brings you into town. And this must be because of my incompetence or whatever. I don't know. I was stupid at the time. I got on the 4 bus. Okay. And I was like, this is funny. Why is it headed out of town? So brought me just out to the middle of nowhere, literally, I said, never again. I'm not taking a bus. I must have been confused because, they drive on, the interesting side of the road, not the right side. And so I was just waiting there to get on the bus, just got catapulted to the middle of nowhere. So I'm like, nope, this is not happening.
Never again. I'm gonna keep riding my bike.
I'm just gonna keep riding my bike. And just get soaked and everything.
That's funny. That's super funny.
And I didn't drink that much before in college. I didn't drink very much, right? I remember in Atlanta having my first legal drink. That was old fashioned, very fancy for a first legal drink.
There we go.
And I for my 21st birthday, there's this restaurant called Rocky Mountain Pizza. That's where we had it, and it took me precisely 2 beers and 2 shots to just end the night.
It's chaos.
Just chaos.
Going to sleep.
So that's part of what I've inherited, this Asian flush syndrome and being naturally lightweight. And so, couple that experience with you end every night at a pub. Right.
Cultural difference. Difference.
Yeah. So I did enjoy that that first year, but moved back to the NIH. Really loved that time. Also, that was first time I came out as gay. To all my lab mates, everything like that. So I felt like I was more of myself there. And then, went back to the Cambridge, UK after several years at the NIH, and thought I wouldn't like it. I ended up really liking it. I went back something like 2017, early 2017, and then, sort of just stayed there. Continue.
Yeah. I feel like that maybe hopefully the timing was better. You didn't just go back into the pouring rain. Maybe you did, but I always love to hear these kind of again. I'm trying to live vicariously because I haven't left the Bay Area, so I love hearing what other places are like, and trying to imagine myself there. And at this kind of this time doing your NIH / grad in the UK, I know you also went and did research in Nigeria. Was this before you went to the UK, or was this during?
That's throwback. So no, actually this was early in my college.
Okay.
This was David Lynn got me involved with that.
Cool.
That's he just literally packed me on a plane to Nigeria.
That's cool. That's super cool. He's like, I need to go figure out these root systems. Now go do it for real and pack up a suitcase and do it. But I would have your ability to travel.
So what was this? This is at the witchweed and the specific the name of the plant I was studying at that time was Striga asiatica, right? That's a particular economic impact in sub-Saharan Africa. And so there's an institute in Nigeria called the International Institute of Tropical Agriculture. It's part of a larger network of nonprofit research institutes that there's one in Mexico City, for example, called CIMMIT, that sort of try to improve the lives of farmers, non-industrial farmers, through research on best techniques, best practices, understanding things that are harming the productivity of soils, of crop sciences, crops in general. And, David had gotten a lot of his seeds from this one person at the International Institute of Tropical Agriculture. And he said, would you like to go? And I'm like, why not? Well, sure. So I remember landing in Lagos International Airport, and just being shocked. I land there, and on the runway there's the carcass of an airplane on the side of the runway, and I'm like,
no.
Wow, that's very interesting. And I get off, and the conveyor belt is in the worst state that you could possibly see something in. And I step out of the airport, and I just see men at the gate with AK-47s, just standing around, just looking, what have I gotten myself into? And then the drive from Lagos International Airport to Ibadan, which is where the institute is. Like, I think that's like, forget how long that is, maybe 4, 5, 6 hour drive, something like that. Was really eye-opening. Like, you and I know potholes in the US, right? And we're really angry at those potholes. My God, some of the potholes in Nigeria are the size of a human, standing up in that pothole, right? Like, you would get into a serious accident if you went into those potholes. And it was very different environment, right? You haven't seen traffic until you've been to Nigeria, right? Because it's like not even organized chaos, just chaos, right? I went to this place, and I had always been used to laboratories in the US where you take things for granted, like power, water, equipment, right? You can take none of those things for granted in an environment like that. And what this institute had done, something really quite spectacular, which was bring a stable source of power, bring a stable source of water over there, because outside of that compound at that time, you could only count on power like during the day for like 3 hours, a couple hours at a time. This place had generators, a lot of really well-trained, skilled PhD level scientists in there.
Cool.
But even then, the tools for what you needed were, fairly lacking, right? It was not a fully well-resourced environment, especially because it was a nonprofit as well. And so I just remember being really shocked at how you could make a lot of progress in an environment like that. And indeed they did, right? So they made do and brought in the locals in order to, really collaborate with them. And I remember working with local scientists in order to, make advances. I was only there for 3 or 4 months, so it wasn't like it was, I made any groundbreaking research or any discoveries at all. It was just very eye-opening on how research is done, and that you really shouldn't take for granted anything at all. Like, you're one step away from just being, no power, no water, right? What are you doing at that point? So,
and that's
I guess not taking that for granted, right, is also a good lesson for entrepreneurs, especially if you're an entrepreneur with a lab-based startup, right?
For sure. And that's something I think I love hearing that, because I think a lot of the time people who are contemplating starting a company think they need to have the insert very, very large number in order to make big things happen. But as you've seen, when you go to a place where that's under-resourced, they can do spectacular work and make do with more finite resources. I'm not saying, or trying to overgeneralize here, that not having resources is great, but I think it's an eye-opening thing to see what type of amazing things can be done when you have finite resources and you got to make do, and there's these constraints that kind of like force you to really think about it and think creatively, and like, how do we bring in the constant source of power, the water, these kinds of things, and having to think outside the box. And I think part of it I'm tying these two things together, like when you were doing the dishes at Georgia Tech, it's like, or I believe it was maybe Emory or Georgia Tech, it's like that type of stuff, like the little stuff that matters. Like when you have finite resources, you have to like min-max like everything. And that habit of min-maxing, I think, is a lesson for any entrepreneur who might be already on the journey or contemplating getting on the journey, is like efficiency and min-maxing like everything down to the like even the stuff, and don't be above it, right? It's like, let's really look deep at what is this thing, what is the value that it provides us, and then try to get as much value as you can. If it doesn't, minimize it if it doesn't. Because like, I think like that, right? It's like you have PhD level scientists and talent in Nigeria doing, work where you would imagine is like impossible, but they're doing the impossible, right? So I think that's really cool. Sorry, I'm on my soapbox now. I love hearing, how people can do research in different environments.
Yeah, and you have a lot of undergrad research experience as well, right? So you is that what
my lab was not that resource, so maybe that's where I built up this kind of thing where it's like
definitely in Berkeley. One time I was to Berkeley and I saw a fire on the highway.
Yeah.
It was like, what am I getting myself into?
Yeah. I think sometimes people think that Berkeley, every lab is like well-resourced. I've done my stints in well-resourced labs. And so I know what that's like too, where there's like $40,000 of consumables in the freezer that they just forget about. But I've also been on the other side where it's like making your own media type stuff. And I think it deeply ingrained in me this, I don't want to call it like, maybe it's like frugality. I'm not saying like frugality means underinvest. It's just like taking a critical look at under the hood of like everything. And then making an ROI decision based on that.
Yeah, I guess there are a couple of points on that. Our chairman at Nuclera has taught me a lot. Jonathan Milner, who founded Abcam. He talked to me of he likened it to spinning a lot of plates, right? And running a startup is like spinning just a ton of plates, right? And you're going to drop some, and that's when you need to resource that, right? And in those resource limited environments, you just don't have the luxury of over resourcing everything. Making sure that there's succession planning, all that stuff that you have a big corporation. You can't do any of that. Like you have to learn forms of accounting, operations, product development, et cetera, all of that, and just make do, spin those plates until you see you're dropping them. You're feeling really crap. You're getting your ass kicked at board meetings. You're still, you're just dropping those plates, and you then get in a team member. Or unfortunately have to replace someone, right? And we all know, that is an inherent part of startup. It's painful, but as you level up, you're like, oh, that's how you're supposed to do it.
Yep.
Oh, that's what good looks like. Over time. So I that's what I think, and then. On the, I call it homebrewing, if you're making your own media or you're, making your own stuff to ship to customers, stuff like that, that only gets you so far until you make a mistake, right? So during my PhD, won't say, the name of anyone or lab, but someone made a mistake in a lab I knew, where they were tasked with making buffers, specific buffers. It sounds like you have a mammalian cell culture background. This was RIPA cell buffer, right? For lysing cells. And this person for a year who was tasked with doing this had forgotten to put one very critical component of that RIPA cell lysis buffer into that. And the entire laboratory had been using that for a year plus, and had published papers using that specific buffer. Right.
Yeah.
That was just a WTF, oh my moment, right? Where a couple of things, there is no task that is too small, right?
Yep.
Make sure that things are being done properly, like washing the dishes. That is incredibly important, because I have a chemistry background. Oftentimes, the best chemists were the people who washed their own dishware and blew their own glassware early on, because those are the tools necessary to get the job done and get proper results and reproducible results. So that part. And sometimes it's worth spending the money to get the best quality.
That's exactly it. And like, I was going to exactly say that, because that's what I meant by like, sometimes I'm not saying you should underinvest. You should definitely invest. But I think you don't like when you think about like in the very beginning, perhaps you don't have even the ability to make that investment. But when you start doing things at scale and there's like multiple stakeholders who are relying on you, you've got to get into more like process oriented mode, or just having maybe procuring from someone who has like a GLP facility that just cranks these things out, just like with like almost no variability. They're just like cranking it out. And you're like, yeah, we're just going to go that direction and not risk kind of a WTF moment.
But even then, you must have remembered the whole FBS, fetal bovine serum debacle from, I think, where, there were reproducibility issues or something like that with that media. I wasn't really doing cell culture at that point, but my colleagues who were just like, So,
It's like, and I think too, is like, that's kind of, I think even like in the earliest days, it's like, you don't have that luxury to buy. And like, you kind of have to like, it's always like bootstrap it yourself in the very beginning to make it work and get it started. But then it's like, what's that saying with like, what got us here won't get us there? It's like, there comes a time when you need to kind of flip that switch. Like exactly what you said, flip that switch, whether it's like you start procuring from someone like, whatever, Millipore Sigma or something, or flip that switch and get the hire, right? Get that critical hire. And like when you maybe me, and I've seen this myself too, where I was like, I used to do everything. Like in, having done this since 2011, I literally used to do everything. Like I used to, mail out invoices, like do everything, and do the cold calls. But eventually there comes a time when that's not scalable. And I like what you said about, like, oh, this is what good looks like when he's like, it's time to like, it goes beyond me and we need to bring in a professional. And then you see magic happen. And then, but you also said on the flip, sometimes everyone does it, no one's perfect. And sometimes you hire the wrong person.
No, and don't sell yourself short, right? The magic is the company in the first place, right? And being in the position to install professionals and upgrade as you go. All right.
Yep.
And I think that the right time, for me at least, I think the right time to flip the switch is, and this may be very, very, biotech, hardware devices, focused device, right? You're always dealing with customers, right? A good startup, I think, always deals with customers and makes sure that you're getting the voice of the customer into your product development. But there comes a time when quarter after quarter, you gotta meet target. Okay. Early in the year, that's not as important, right? You need to get to your product. And it's very difficult to time those things. And you get some leeway, as much leeway as your investors in the market will give you, especially if your valuation is low. But when your valuation starts to creep up and you're raising more money, and you now have, it's not the prototype with your customers. It's not the demo with your customers. It's not the story that you're selling in a pitch deck. It's an actual piece of equipment or a piece of thing that your customers are relying on. That is the time you flip the switch and you try to, balance everything as much as possible. Things fail, things burn, and you've got to, just be able to solve enough problems so that the customers don't hate you, right? Yep. So that you're all delivering value to the customer. Yep. And just level up as quickly as possible. Because anticipating that leveling up probably can't get the timing right. You burn too much cash and you die, right? So flipping that switch to me is a step change in burn as well. And you just need to be able to time those things accurately. And the skill of timing that when you get product market fit, when you flip that switch to go super operational, and make sure that you're hitting targets every month, every quarter, because it's not just from product development, or even operations, it's also finance and commercial, right? That need to keep that humming, right? Keep a funnel going. Make sure that your customers are getting supplied what they need. Make sure that complaints are getting sorted rapidly. Make sure that you're leveling up your voice of customer game as your investment is going up in your product development. That all takes skilled people, and some of your co-founders will be able to level up with you. You'll have to bring in professionals as well. I've not seen anyone not, right? Everyone has to bring
no
in.
one does it alone. No. I guess really quick, this is another kind of a cultural question. What was the difference between the lab in Georgia versus the lab in the UK? Your experience.
Lab in Bethesda, Maryland.
In Bethesda. Like, what were all the differences?
All of those laboratory differences. So, the lab in Georgia, I've always been fortunate to be in well-resourced labs. Okay,
cool.
It's just, except for Nigeria, right? That's when and even that was, nothing to sniff at, relative to the where they were. But there were differing degrees of resourcing, right? So, I think, and also I was in different roles, right? So, I was a undergraduate research assistant and at Georgia Tech. So, I wasn't spending as much money. I did get a first author paper out of there in JAX, right? So that was great. I loved that. That was a great experience. But I probably spent more money than what most undergrad research students spend, right? I was also there all the time. It was basically a piece of furniture. But I didn't, I was spending on the order of magnitude, like 5 to 15K, something in that range per year. That's what I was spending at Tech. When I went to the NIH and Cambridge, that was a whole nother level, right? So Shankar's lab, well-resourced. Adrian's lab in the NIH, even better, right? And so probably my budget over my PhD is probably well over $100,000 US dollars, right? So I think there is a frugalness to doing stuff, but ultimately, if you have good people and you have the cash and budget to spend, you're ultimately going to produce good stuff as long as your people are high caliber, striving, to achieve what they need to achieve. And, out of my PhD, I got a first author Nature paper, and that was something I really, really proud of. Sort of justified the spend, because just imagine if I didn't.
What was the counterfactual, the flips?
That was a knife's edge, right there. I want to, my difficulty getting protein brought me right up to the deadline I need to get my PhD by, because the University of Cambridge and just the UK system in general is different from an American PhD, because in America, this is both a blessing and not a double-edged sword. You can spend an unlimited amount of time in your PhD, right? In America. UK, it's 4 years. Okay. It's 4 years and you graduate. You can continue being a postdoc in the lab, but you graduate. You got to write up and do it. And universities' funding is put at risk if they don't abide by that. Okay. Max 4 years. And some people do it in 3. In fact, that was the typical, you did a 3-year bachelor's, a 1-year master's, and then a 3-year PhD. That and in addition to that, the structure of the NIH program, some of the criticism that it gets is that it brings you to 2 different laboratories. So if you're not doing that correctly or carefully, you could be doing 2 projects, 2 separate projects.
Oh no!
Within 4 years, right? So that doesn't set you up for success, right? So the key is the one thing that you are working on, that you're spending money towards, and that is your entire focus. You can do some other stuff, but your focus has got to be that one thing that you won't need to get towards. And my focus was that one structure I need to get to in order to get a Nature paper, right? That was my focus in my PhD. And, just the amount of resources at the NIH is just mind-boggling, right? Just mind-boggling. In the basement, I had access to a fermentation facility,
Casual.
At University of Cambridge, Department of Chemistry is well-resourced, right? That's by no means not a well-resourced, that's a very well-resourced environment. And I remember dealing with this crummy emulsiflex cell, E. coli lysis system, that dealt with nitrogen canisters or compressed air canisters. And, you would have a liter of lysate or some or things that you need lyse, and as the compressed air started to run out, it would just sort of get lower and lower and run out, and then you would still be left with like 500 mil of this goop there that you process. And you're like, crap, what do I do? And then I go to the NIH, and in the fermentation facility, it's like this $30,000-$40,000 microfluidizer system that is hooked up to house air that is of high pressure, and you don't have to worry about that at all. There's no issues. And so just being able to get through the day-to-day easily made my life so much easier, right? And made that money spent so much more effective. So it's not enough, I think, to just throw money at a problem. You need to throw money at a problem in a well-resourced infrastructure environment for people to actually get the job done, right? And ultimately, that goes back to the plug of Nuclera's e-protein discovery system. So
yeah.
Make sure you do that to smooth your path to getting access to high-quality proteins for your research.
And I love that. I think it's what I'm seeing as kind of like a through line is that there are these lived experiences that are kind of like juxtaposed, that kind of inform or maybe spark inspiration. And it seems to me that you seem to carry it with you through this all. And, it's about, like you said, like when you're doing your grad studies, you're like, this is taking freaking forever. Like, this is taking forever. I have 4 years. Whereas in America, it's like, yeah, take your time.
That's all for this episode of the Biotech Startups podcast. We hope you enjoyed our discussion with Michael Chen. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe, leave us a review, and share it with your friends. Thanks for listening, and we look forward to having you join us again for part 2 of our conversation with Michael. The Biotech Startups podcast is produced by Excedr. Don't want to miss an episode? Search for the Biotech Startups podcast wherever you get your podcasts and click subscribe. Excedr provides research labs with equipment leases on founder-friendly terms to support paths to exceptional outcomes. To learn more, visit our website www.excedr.com. On behalf of the team here at Excedr, thanks for listening. The Biotech Startups podcast provides general insights into the life science sector through the experiences of its guests. The use of information on this podcast or materials linked from the podcast is at the user's own risk. The views expressed by the participants are their own and are not the views of Excedr or sponsors. No reference to any product, service, or company in the podcast is an endorsement by Excedr or its guests.